In the cramped and dusty apartment tucked away in the backstreets of the city, a young black artist named Elijah Collins worked tirelessly, his focus unwavering as he molded the world around him with each stroke of his paintbrush. His small living room was a chaotic scene of half-finished canvases, scattered tubes of oil paint, and brushes in various stages of wear. Each piece he created was a glimpse into a world far beyond what most could imagine, a world full of color, emotion, and raw expression. Elijah had always felt that he was destined to create. Ever since he was a child, his eyes had been drawn to art in all its forms. However, the world around him never seemed to share his enthusiasm. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, surrounded by poverty and limited resources, Elijah found it difficult to express his artistry beyond the walls of his home. His talents were known only to a handful of people who recognized the depth and power of his creations but lacked the means to help him rise to the surface of the competitive art world. The world outside was indifferent to him, there was no space for someone like Elijah. Art, in his community, was often viewed as a luxury, something for the elite. As he grew older, Elijah's dreams of becoming a renowned artist felt more and more like a distant fantasy. Yet, he persevered. He worked long hours at a local convenience store, barely scraping by, while his nights were spent in front of his easel, breathing life into his visions. His art was his refuge, the one place where he felt truly free. But despite his dedication and raw talent, the recognition he craved remained just out of reach. It wasn't that Elijah didn't have supporters, he had a handful of loyal admirers who praised his work, but they were often people in the same boat as him, struggling to make ends meet. The art world, the world of galleries and collectors, was a world Elijah was never invited into. He was a voice unheard, a genius unseen, forever cast in the shadow of the more established, more marketable artists. His race, his background, and his lack of fame all played a role in keeping him out of the limelight. And yet, Elijah's creations were masterpieces, of that, he was certain. His use of color was revolutionary, capturing both the beauty and the chaos of the human experience. His paintings told stories that transcended time and place, stories of struggle, love, hope, and pain. He poured his soul into each piece, each one a reflection of his own journey and the stories of those who shared his experiences. One afternoon, as Elijah was putting the finishing touches on a piece that he had been working on for months, he received a call that would change the course of his life. A local gallery owner, a man by the name of Marcus Caldwell, had seen a photograph of one of his paintings online and wanted to meet him. It was a rare opportunity, and Elijah knew that he had to make the most of it. He wasn't sure if this gallery was the right fit for him, but he had little to lose. Elijah arrived at Caldwell's gallery that evening, his heart pounding with anticipation. The gallery was one of the oldest in the city, a grand building with high ceilings and large windows that let in the soft, golden glow of the setting sun. It was a place where only the most prestigious artists had their work displayed. The smell of freshly polished wood mixed with the faint scent of expensive perfume, and the air was thick with the quiet hum of an exclusive art world that Elijah had always felt detached from. As he entered, he was greeted by Marcus Caldwell, a tall, middle-aged man with slicked back hair and an air of superiority. Caldwell's tailored suit was impeccable, his posture rigid and commanding. There was something about him that made Elijah feel small in comparison, but he didn't let it show. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. "Ah, you must be Elijah Collins," Caldwell said, his voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable hint of condescension. "I've heard a lot about your work. Let's take a look at what you brought." Elijah followed the gallery owner through the spacious room, the sound of his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. He carried his painting in a protective tube, carefully walking as if each step could make or break his future. As they reached the back of the gallery, where the less pristine pieces were displayed, Caldwell motioned for Elijah to unroll the canvas. Elijah hesitated for a moment before unveiling the painting. It was a striking piece, full of swirling colors and bold brushstrokes. The subject was a woman, a symbol of resilience, surrounded by abstract representations of chaos and struggle. It was one of Elijah's most personal works, and he had poured everything into it, his fears, his dreams, his frustrations. It was his soul on the canvas. Caldwell glanced at it briefly, his face impassive. He adjusted his glasses and examined the piece with a critical eye, but it was clear that he wasn't impressed. He shifted uncomfortably, as if he couldn't quite place what he was looking at. "Interesting," Caldwell said dismissively, his gaze flicking to another painting in the room. "But I have to be honest with you, Elijah. This kind of work, it's not really what the market's looking for these days. It's too raw. Too unpolished. People want something more refined, something with broader appeal." Elijah felt a sting in his chest, but he didn't show it. He had been prepared for rejection, after all, this wasn't the first time he had faced it. But something in Caldwell's words felt different, something that hinted at more than just artistic critique. It felt personal, as if the gallery owner was dismissing him not just as an artist, but as a person. "I understand," Elijah said quietly, forcing a smile. "I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what I do. It's my passion." Caldwell nodded but continued to look at the piece with a mixture of confusion and disdain. "Well, I think I'll pass on this one," he said, his tone almost casual. "It's not really what we're looking for right now. But thanks for bringing it in. Maybe another time, we'll see if your work aligns more with the market. Good luck." Elijah's heart sank. He nodded, his pride barely holding together as he rolled the painting back into its tube. It wasn't the first time he had faced rejection, but it felt different this time. It was as if Caldwell's dismissal was not just about his art, but about who he was. Elijah, the black artist from the wrong side of town, was not fit for the glossy world of high-end galleries. He wasn't worth the gallery owner's time. But as Elijah left the gallery that evening, there was a fire that began to grow within him. He knew that his work was valuable, not just because of the techniques he used, but because of the story he had to tell. The world may have dismissed him, but he was not done yet. He would find his place in the art world, whether they liked it or not. The encounter with Marcus Caldwell was only the beginning of Elijah's journey. The world would soon learn that the genius they had overlooked was more than capable of making his mark. And when that moment came, the same gallery that had turned him away would find itself at the mercy of the very artist it had scorned. The days following Elijah Collins' meeting with Marcus Caldwell felt like a blur of disappointment. His heart had sunk in the face of the gallery owner's dismissive attitude, but he refused to let that moment define him. Instead of retreating, Elijah doubled down on his craft. He spent long nights in his cramped apartment, pouring his soul into his art with a new determination burning within him. He would not allow the rejection to be the final word in his story. But, as the days passed, the sting of Caldwell's words lingered, gnawing at Elijah's resolve. There was something in the gallery owner's tone, something condescending, as if Caldwell believed that a black artist like Elijah could never rise to the level of prominence he had been dismissing. Elijah's drive to succeed was rooted not just in his desire to prove his talent, but in his desire to prove the art world wrong. They had underestimated him, and he intended to make them see what they had missed. Elijah's reputation in the local art scene grew, albeit slowly. Small galleries began to feature his work, albeit in modest spaces, where his art could be appreciated by those who had an eye for it but lacked the means to elevate it further. Despite the limited recognition, Elijah's paintings were gaining traction. His unique voice, his ability to express complex emotions through his abstract art, began to catch the attention of collectors in underground circles. People who could see the depths of his genius, his works, were a fresh breath in a stale world of art. They weren't just beautiful, they were raw and real. But it wasn't until a quiet evening several months after his meeting with Caldwell that the true significance of his work began to unfold. One fateful afternoon, Elijah received a call that would change his life. It was from a prominent art collector named Martin Sinclair, a man whose name was whispered with reverence in the art world. Sinclair had heard of Elijah's work from an anonymous source, and after viewing several of his pieces in private collections, he wanted to meet with the artist. "Mr. Collins, I've seen your art," Sinclair's voice came through the phone, smooth and professional. "And I must say, I'm impressed. I believe your work has the potential to reshape the conversation in the art world. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to showcase your paintings at a high-profile event in Paris next month. Elijah was speechless. Paris. The city of art. The city where masterpieces were born. This was the break he had been waiting for, but it was more than that. It was an acknowledgement. It was proof that he was not just an artist, but a visionary, someone whose work was deserving of a global platform. His hand shook as he hung up the phone, his mind racing. He could hardly believe it. He had gone from being rejected by one gallery owner, dismissed as a lesser artist, to being courted by one of the most influential collectors in the world. His dreams were suddenly within reach. Meanwhile, back at Caldwell's gallery, things were not going as well as Marcus Caldwell had hoped. The art world was undergoing significant shifts, and with the rise of online platforms and new trends, even the most prestigious galleries were struggling. Caldwell's gallery, once a beacon of exclusivity, was now a shadow of its former self. His sales were declining, and the fresh influx of new, unrecognized artists was taking a toll on his traditional approach. As the months passed, Caldwell's frustration grew. His gallery had become stagnant, unable to attract the kind of clients and buyers it once did. The art world, it seemed, was changing too fast for him to keep up. His contacts, once loyal and influential, were no longer showing interest. He had lost his edge, his ability to spot the next big thing before it became a trend. He knew that the gallery's survival depended on finding fresh talent, but the market was saturated, and the competition was fierce. Then, a rumor began to circulate. There was a new artist on the scene, someone whose works were selling for millions of dollars. The name of this artist was whispered with awe, and Caldwell couldn't help but wonder if this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The idea of a mystery artist making waves without the traditional credentials intrigued him. Who was this person? What was the story behind their sudden success? As weeks passed, Caldwell's curiosity grew. He started asking around, trying to find any leads that would point him to this elusive artist. It wasn't long before he learned that the artist in question was none other than Elijah Collins, the same artist he had dismissed months earlier. Caldwell's heart sank as the pieces fell into place. This was the artist whose work had once seemed so raw to him, but now, it was in demand on the global stage. The pieces Elijah had created, which Caldwell had thought unrefined, were now selling for prices that rivaled some of the most well-known artists in history. The gallery owner's smugness quickly turned to panic. How had he missed this? Elijah's name was everywhere. Art critics, collectors, and fellow artists were all speaking about him in reverent tones. He had become a symbol of innovation and resilience, a figure whose work transcended race and background. His paintings were no longer just pieces of art, they were statements of power and identity, embraced by people from all walks of life. Caldwell's pride was wounded. He had made a grave mistake by turning away such a talent, and now, he was struggling to save his business. The gallery, once a fortress of exclusivity, was now on the brink of collapse, and Elijah Collins, the very artist he had mocked, was the one responsible for the shift. The realization hit Caldwell like a ton of bricks. He had allowed his own biases to cloud his judgment, dismissing Elijah based on assumptions and preconceived notions. He had failed to recognize the power of Elijah's vision, and in doing so, he had lost his chance to showcase one of the most important artists of his time. But just as quickly as his panic had set in, a new idea began to form in Caldwell's mind. What if he could make things right? What if he could somehow get Elijah to return to his gallery? Perhaps, he thought, there was still a way to salvage the situation. He wasn't above swallowing his pride if it meant reopening the door to the next big thing in the art world. Little did he know, Elijah was already several steps ahead, and soon, Caldwell would find himself face to face with the artist he had so foolishly dismissed. Months passed since Marcus Caldwell had so arrogantly dismissed Elijah Collins' art, and in that time, the young artist had steadily transformed his reputation. What had once been an isolated career, confined to small, local galleries, had now blossomed into something truly global. Elijah's works were no longer just the whispers of underground collectors, His name was on the lips of art critics, auction houses, and prestigious museums worldwide. What Caldwell had failed to see was the heart and soul Elijah poured into every brushstroke, the raw emotion that ignited every piece. The world, it seemed, was finally starting to catch up. Elijah had, in essence, become an enigma, a treasure unearthed by those who could see the value in his unique, fearless approach to art. It wasn't just that his works had gained widespread attention, they were being sold for astronomical prices. A painting that had once been dismissed as raw now went for millions of dollars at auction. The boldness of Elijah's paintings spoke to a new generation, a generation that embraced the rawness of truth and the beauty of authenticity. The art world, which had once been dominated by established names, was being turned on its head. In this new era, it wasn't just about what was marketable or refined. It was about something deeper, a connection to the real, the unpolished, and the untold stories of the world. Elijah's art resonated with the masses, transcending racial and societal boundaries. His works weren't just paintings, they were powerful statements on life, culture, and the struggles of marginalized communities. They conveyed a sense of strength, resilience, and hope that was difficult to ignore. And in the midst of this meteoric rise, one particular work of Elijah's, an abstract piece titled Roots of Fire, was being talked about everywhere. The painting depicted a figure of a woman, her body intertwined with vivid flames and earth, as if she were both rising from the ashes and returning to the roots of her ancestors. The intense use of color and texture captured the power and beauty of her struggle, an embodiment of the strength within adversity. It was a piece that spoke to everything Elijah had endured in his life: struggle, survival, and eventual triumph. When the painting was first revealed at an art auction, the bidding war that ensued was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Collectors from all over the world were fighting for a chance to own a piece of history, a moment that would define the art world for years to come. And when the hammer fell, Roots of Fire sold for an eye-watering $20 million, more than twice the amount anyone had expected. This was only the beginning. Elijah's success snowballed. Galleries clamored to showcase his works, and renowned art institutions fought for a chance to feature him in their collections. What had once been a single, unnoticed artist in a small apartment was now a global sensation. But while Elijah basked in the recognition, he remained grounded, his focus still on creating art that mattered. He knew that this success was just the beginning of something far greater. It wasn't long before Elijah began to consider the next step in his journey. He was more than just an artist now, he had become a figure of influence in the art world. He wanted to make sure that other emerging, underrepresented artists had the same chance to succeed that he had. His vision wasn't just to be seen, it was to change the very landscape of art and ensure that voices like his own were no longer silenced. In a conversation with Martin Sinclair, the collector who had first introduced Elijah to the global stage, Elijah revealed his plans for the future. "I want to create a space for artists who are overlooked, artists who are doing work that's raw and real. I want to buy a gallery, one that's rooted in the belief that art can't be defined by convention." Sinclair, ever the visionary himself, saw the potential in Elijah's idea. "You have the means now," he said. "And you've built the reputation. There's no reason why you can't make this happen. The world is ready for a new kind of space, a place where true art is celebrated, regardless of the artist's background or their fame." Elijah knew exactly where he wanted to begin. There was one gallery in particular that had caught his attention, the very same gallery that had once rejected him. Caldwell's gallery, which had been a staple of the art world for years, was now struggling. Sales had fallen off, and the space was no longer attracting the clientele it once had. Caldwell himself, once brimming with arrogance and confidence, now found himself scrambling to hold on to what was left of his business. Elijah had heard through the grapevine that Caldwell was facing severe financial difficulties. The prestigious gallery that had once snubbed him was now a fading relic, struggling to keep up with the changing tides of the art world. The irony wasn't lost on Elijah. He couldn't help but smile to himself. The same man who had dismissed his work, who had reduced his art to nothing more than raw and unpolished, was now on the brink of losing his livelihood. The universe, it seemed, had a way of balancing the scales. As the art world continued to praise Elijah's brilliance, the media began to speculate about the artist's next move. Would he create his own museum? Would he take his works on a worldwide tour? No one knew for sure, but there were whispers about his intentions to reshape the gallery landscape. What the media didn't know, however, was that Elijah was about to do something far more unexpected than anyone could have imagined. He wasn't just going to buy a gallery, he was going to buy Caldwell's gallery, the very space where he had been mocked and dismissed. He was going to purchase the place that had once turned him away, and in doing so, he would show the world that no one, not even the most established figures in the art world, could deny his place in it. And when that day came, Caldwell would face the truth of what it meant to underestimate a genius. The day Elijah Collins walked into Caldwell's gallery, it felt surreal. He had walked past this very gallery countless times over the years, his eyes tracing the windows that displayed the works of artists he had admired but could never afford. Now, it was his turn to step inside, not as a visitor, but as the new owner. The world had shifted, and with it, so had his place within it. Elijah had kept his plans secret. The deal to purchase the gallery had been swift and decisive, brokered through Martin Sinclair, who had connections that could get things done in the art world faster than most could even imagine. Sinclair had understood Elijah's desire for control over his own narrative, and he knew that the symbolic act of buying Caldwell's gallery would send a message far beyond the walls of the art world. It would show that Elijah was more than just a talented artist, he was a force who could redefine the way art was appreciated, valued, and marketed. The gallery itself was just as he remembered it, a space of white walls, polished floors, and glass cases holding expensive sculptures. But the air in the room now felt heavy. There was a weight of change in the atmosphere, an undercurrent of tension that neither the staff nor the regular patrons could ignore. When Elijah first stepped inside, he noticed the familiar faces of Caldwell's staff, each one of them seeming uncertain, their glances darting between him and their phones. Word had spread that the gallery had been sold, but no one knew to whom, until now. They looked at Elijah with an awkward curiosity, unsure whether to greet him as a client or as the man who would decide the fate of the space they had once worked in. It wasn't long before Marcus Caldwell himself appeared. His face paled as he caught sight of Elijah, his posture stiffening as he straightened his tie. He had heard rumors about the buyer, but never in his wildest dreams had he imagined it would be Elijah Collins. The same artist he had mocked and rejected just a year ago now stood before him, not as a struggling unknown, but as a powerhouse who had reshaped the very world he had once dominated. "Mr. Caldwell," Elijah began, his voice calm but firm. "It's good to see you again." Caldwell, caught off guard and unwilling to show weakness, tried to mask his shock with a forced smile. "Mr. Collins, I didn't expect you to, well, I suppose it's not my place to question your decisions. I assume you're here for business?" "Indeed," Elijah replied. "This gallery has a rich history, but it's been a while since it's been relevant. You see, I have big plans for this space." Caldwell's lips tightened. He knew exactly what Elijah was implying. The very idea that the young artist had come full circle, from being dismissed to now holding the reins, was a bitter pill to swallow. But what hurt more than his ego was the fact that Caldwell knew deep down that Elijah's vision for the gallery was far greater than his own had ever been. The world had passed him by, and he had been too arrogant to realize it until it was too late. "So, you plan on changing things around here, huh?" Caldwell asked, trying to maintain his composure. "I plan on more than just changing things," Elijah said with a quiet intensity. "I'm going to bring a new wave of art into this space, art that reflects the world as it is, not as you or I wish it to be. I'm going to show the world that art isn't about privilege or exclusivity. It's about authenticity, about the stories that are often overlooked. It's about artists who, like me, were told they weren't good enough, only to prove that they were more than worthy." Caldwell's expression hardened as he crossed his arms. "You don't understand, Collins. The art world is about exclusivity, about curating the right image, the right reputation. You can't just let anyone in." Elijah smiled, though there was no humor in it. "That's the problem. For too long, you've let only the right people in. You've excluded the ones who didn't fit your image. But now? The world is different. People want real stories. They want authenticity, and they'll pay top dollar for it. I'm not here to curate an image. I'm here to open the doors to something that's been waiting to be seen. Caldwell was silent for a moment, staring at Elijah as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He could see the fire in Elijah's eyes, the same fire that had driven him to prove himself time and time again. It was clear that this wasn't just about selling art anymore. This was about changing the very fabric of the art world. I suppose you're going to let the artists you represent dictate the direction of the gallery now? Caldwell asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Not exactly, Elijah said, leaning forward slightly. I'll let them have a voice, but I'll also make sure they're given the platform they deserve. Artists like me, black artists, underrepresented voices, will have the chance to be seen, to be appreciated, and to be paid what we're truly worth. I won't let anyone be dismissed simply because they don't fit a mold. No, Mr. Caldwell, that's not how the future of art works. The tension in the room was palpable. It felt as though the entire gallery held its breath, waiting for Caldwell to respond. For a moment, it seemed as though the older man might argue, that he might try to assert his dominance one last time. But then, something in his eyes flickered, something like resignation. He realized that Elijah wasn't just an artist anymore. He was a revolution in motion. The future of art had passed him by, and now, Elijah was the one steering the ship. I guess this is goodbye, then, Caldwell said, his voice devoid of its former arrogance. Elijah nodded. You'll always have your place in art history, Marcus. But it's time for new blood. It's time for new stories. With that, Elijah turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the gallery's grand hall. As he stepped outside into the bright sunlight, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This wasn't just about buying a gallery. It was about proving that he, and countless others like him, were worthy of being seen. It was about showing the world that art was not something to be confined to the elite, it was something to be shared with everyone, in all its raw, beautiful, and imperfect glory. And as he walked away from Caldwell's gallery, now his own, Elijah Collins knew that this was only the beginning. He was about to show the world the true power of art. The first day after Elijah Collins took ownership of Caldwell's gallery was nothing short of transformative. The walls of the space, once dominated by the highbrow, elitist air of old masters and overpriced, overhyped art, were now bursting with fresh, untold stories. Elijah had invited a diverse range of artists to display their works, and the energy in the gallery was electric. It was clear from the moment the doors opened that things would never be the same. Elijah's vision for the gallery was one of inclusivity. He had gathered artists from different backgrounds, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, queer, and others who had been historically underrepresented in the art world. These were artists whose voices needed to be heard, whose stories had been muted for far too long. And now, they were about to take center stage. The opening event, aptly named Voices Unbound, was a massive success. It featured an eclectic mix of multimedia works, sculptures of reclaimed materials, abstract paintings with bold, expressive colors, installations that blurred the lines between art and activism. There was no single theme to the show, it was a collection of perspectives, each unique, yet all of them speaking to a common experience, the struggle to be heard, the fight to be seen, and the triumph of being unapologetically oneself. Elijah stood at the center of it all, his presence commanding but approachable. He'd spoken to each of the artists personally, offering them his full support, not just as a collector, but as someone who understood the weight of being overlooked. He was no longer the artist on the fringes, struggling to make a name. He was the curator, the champion of those who had been sidelined by the traditional art establishment. But perhaps the most powerful moment of the evening was when Elijah stood before the painting that had changed everything for him, Roots of Fire. It was now framed in a place of honor at the gallery's center, surrounded by flowers and soft lighting, like a tribute to both his journey and the artists who had followed in his footsteps. As Elijah looked at the piece, the emotions that had fueled its creation flooded back to him. Roots of Fire had not just been a painting, it was a manifesto. It had been Elijah's personal declaration to the world, a symbol of overcoming adversity and claiming his space in the world of art. But now, it represented something much larger than that, a beacon for every artist who had ever felt marginalized, dismissed, or undervalued. "Do you see it?" Elijah asked one of the artists who had accompanied him on his journey. He stood beside him, both of them gazing at the painting. The artist nodded. "I see it. It's not just your story, Elijah. It's all of us." Elijah smiled, proud of the movement he had sparked, but not content to rest. This gallery was just the beginning. He had a bigger plan in mind. In the weeks that followed, word spread about the gallery's new direction, and the art world took notice. Critics who had once turned their noses up at Elijah's work now took his opinions seriously. Influential buyers, eager to get a glimpse of the next big thing, began flocking to the gallery in droves. The media had picked up on the story, highlighting how the owner of Caldwell's gallery had gone from being a rising star in the art world to a true disruptor of its rigid hierarchies. The transformation of the gallery was a living testament to what could happen when those who had been excluded from mainstream narratives were finally given a platform. The space was no longer just a business, it was a movement, a cultural shift that showed the world that art didn't belong to an elite few. It belonged to anyone with a story to tell. But for Elijah, the success of the gallery wasn't the only victory. There was a much deeper sense of fulfillment that came from knowing that he had paved the way for others to follow in his footsteps. His influence was now shaping a generation of young artists who no longer had to conform to an outdated notion of what was considered art or worthy. His success wasn't just personal, it was a collective one. As the weeks turned into months, the gallery flourished. But not everyone was pleased with the changes. Some of the old patrons of Caldwell's gallery, those who had come for the traditional, expensive artworks, began to complain. They didn't like the new direction, didn't like the disruptive art being showcased. They longed for the days when galleries were about prestige and exclusivity. They saw Elijah's changes as a threat, as something that tainted the sanctity of the art world they had come to know and love. Elijah had expected this resistance. He knew that change wasn't always easy to accept, especially for those who had benefited from the old system. But he wasn't worried. He had come too far to turn back now. His mission was bigger than the complaints of a few wealthy patrons. It was about the future of art, about dismantling the barriers that had kept so many talented artists from finding their place in the world. It was about proving that art didn't belong to the elite, it belonged to everyone. One particular evening, a group of former patrons arrived at the gallery with an air of quiet disapproval. They stood in front of Roots of Fire, murmuring amongst themselves about the quality of the art on display and the lack of tasteful curation. Elijah watched them from afar, his arms crossed as he listened to their complaints. "I thought this place was supposed to be a reflection of high culture," one of them remarked loudly, not realizing that Elijah was standing just a few feet away. Elijah walked over to them, his steps deliberate and calm. When he reached the group, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of his conviction. "This gallery is a reflection of the world as it is, not the sanitized, curated version that people like you want it to be," he said. "Art isn't about making people comfortable. It's about challenging them to see things differently. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then perhaps it's time you rethink what art means to you." The group fell silent, taken aback by his boldness. Elijah knew he had made his point. He wasn't going to back down, not for anyone. His vision was clear, and the world was already responding to it. In that moment, Elijah realized that he had already won. His gallery was more than just a space, it was a living, breathing entity that challenged the status quo. It was a space where voices that had been silenced for too long could finally be heard. And in doing so, Elijah Collins had rewritten the narrative of what it meant to be an artist in the 21st century. As the months passed, Caldwell's gallery became more than just a place for artists to exhibit their work. It became a symbol of resistance, a cultural touchstone that redefined the power structures of the art world. Elijah Collins's transformation from struggling artist to gallery owner was not just a personal triumph, It was a beacon of possibility for every artist who had been told they weren't enough. His vision had not only changed the gallery but also catalyzed a movement that was spreading far beyond the walls of his space. The art world, for all its sophistication and pretension, could no longer ignore the powerful message Elijah had sent. His exhibits were featured in major art publications. His name was now synonymous with not just creativity, but activism, an artist who had used his platform to amplify voices that had long been silenced. It wasn't just his own work that gained recognition, but the work of dozens of other talented artists who had once struggled to find their place in the traditional gallery system. Elijah's success was far-reaching. He began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, panel discussions, and international art festivals. His presence was no longer confined to the gallery, it had spread into the broader conversation about what art could be and who could make it. He was now a thought leader, an advocate for art that challenged societal norms, addressed social issues, and told stories that had been hidden for far too long. But for Elijah, the recognition was never the goal. He had never sought fame, nor had he been interested in accolades or titles. What mattered to him was the transformation of the art world, the way in which the narrative had shifted to include those who had once been on the outside looking in. What mattered was that young artists, those from marginalized communities, those whose voices had been overlooked or dismissed, now had a space where they could thrive. In his quieter moments, when the hustle of the gallery had settled down and the lights were dimmed, Elijah would stand alone in the center of the space. He would look at the walls, filled with pieces that spoke to the struggles and triumphs of countless lives, and he would reflect on how far he had come. He thought about the days when he had been ridiculed, when his art had been deemed not worthy by those who held the power in the art world. He thought about how many times he had been told that he would never make it, that he didn't have the right connections, the right background, or the right look. And yet, here he was. But Elijah also knew that his work was far from done. The world he had entered, this art world, was vast and sprawling, with many corners still untouched, many voices still unheard. While he had achieved great success, there was always more to be done. There were still barriers to break down, still narratives to challenge, and still artists to discover. He had become a mentor, a guiding force for many of the artists who had first exhibited at his gallery. They came to him not only for guidance on their work, but for advice on how to navigate a world that often seemed set up to keep them out. He would sit with them over coffee, listening to their ideas, helping them refine their craft, and encouraging them to take risks. He had learned from his own journey that the best art often came from moments of vulnerability, from being willing to push beyond one's comfort zone. One evening, as Elijah sat in his office at the gallery, he received a phone call from one of his former mentors, an established artist who had played a significant role in shaping his early career. The artist, now well into his 60s, was calling to congratulate Elijah on his success. He had heard about the recent accolades and had been following the changes at Caldwell's gallery with interest. "I have to admit, Elijah," the artist said with a chuckle, "I didn't see it coming. But I'm proud of you. You've changed the game. You've taken what was once a system of gatekeeping and turned it on its head." Elijah smiled. "It wasn't just me. There are so many artists out there, people who are ready to make their mark, but who need someone to believe in them. And you've done that," the mentor replied. "I've watched you grow, not just as an artist, but as a leader. You've made it possible for others to believe in themselves." Elijah leaned back in his chair, taking in the words. It wasn't just about creating art, it was about creating a lasting legacy. A legacy where those who had been denied opportunities for so long could finally take their place in the spotlight. In the midst of his successes, Elijah made a choice. He would use a portion of the gallery's earnings to fund scholarships for young, underrepresented artists who lacked the financial means to pursue their dreams. He wanted to ensure that the next generation of artists had the resources they needed to succeed, just as he had. This decision was a turning point for Elijah. It was no longer about him proving himself or making a name for himself in the art world. It was about creating a ripple effect, a chain reaction of empowerment that would continue long after he was gone. Through his scholarship program, artists from all over the world, artists who had been overlooked by traditional institutions would have access to mentorship, studio space, and the chance to exhibit their work. As word spread about the program, Elijah's vision expanded. He realized that Caldwell's gallery had the potential to do more than just showcase art. It could be a hub for creative innovation, a place where art intersected with activism, where artists could come together to support each other and work toward social change. The gallery began to host regular workshops and open forums, bringing in experts in various fields to speak on topics ranging from mental health to social justice, race relations to environmental activism. The gallery's reach had expanded beyond the confines of its physical space. It became a cultural hub, not just in the art world, but in the broader public consciousness. Elijah's name was no longer just associated with the gallery, it had become a symbol of progress, a name synonymous with the fight for equality, the championing of voices that had been ignored for too long. As Elijah stood in front of Roots of Fire one quiet evening, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This piece, this painting, was no longer just a work of art. It had become a part of a much larger movement, a part of the legacy he was building. And with that thought, Elijah Collins smiled, knowing that his work, his mission, would continue long after the gallery doors closed. His legacy would live on through the artists he had mentored, the voices he had amplified, and the system of art he had helped to reshape. Years passed, and Caldwell's gallery continued to thrive under Elijah Collins's leadership. The gallery had become a symbol of change, and its influence rippled far beyond the art world. Elijah's name had become synonymous with breaking barriers, championing underrepresented voices, and redefining what art could be. He had taken on the role of mentor, philanthropist, and activist, and in doing so, he had created a movement that was transforming the global art scene. Elijah's scholarship program, which had started with a handful of young artists, had grown into one of the most sought-after initiatives for emerging talents. The program was now internationally recognized, and countless artists from disadvantaged backgrounds had benefited from the opportunity to pursue their passion without the financial burdens that had once held them back. They were given the tools, the space, and the encouragement they needed to flourish, and many had gone on to have their own successful exhibitions, their work appearing in major galleries, and their names becoming known around the world. But despite all his success, Elijah remained humble. He never forgot the years of struggle, the times when he had been dismissed, ignored, or told that his art wasn't worthy. He understood the power of resilience and the importance of perseverance. He also knew that, for all that he had achieved, the work was never truly finished. The art world was still in flux, and there were still so many voices to be heard. As the years went on, Elijah took on fewer public appearances. He was still active in the gallery, still deeply involved in curating shows and mentoring young artists, but he had grown more introspective. He began spending more time in his personal studio, creating new works of his own, drawing inspiration from his journey and the artists he had supported. He found peace in his art, a reflection of the tumultuous years he had lived through and the lessons he had learned along the way. One particular work, a large mixed-media piece titled Reflections of a Dreamer, stood out as his magnum opus. The painting, created with vibrant blues and fiery oranges, was a visual representation of his own experiences, a combination of the struggles of his youth, the triumphs of his career, and the hope he felt for the future. The piece was a tribute to all the artists who had crossed paths with him over the years, and it was to be displayed in the gallery's permanent collection as a testament to the legacy that had begun with Roots of Fire. As Elijah continued to create, his influence spread into new fields. He began collaborating with architects and designers to incorporate art into public spaces. His vision of art was one that should be accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford to visit a gallery. He worked on projects that brought art into schools, hospitals, and community centers, understanding that art had the power to heal, to inspire, and to unite. In one of the most memorable projects, Elijah helped redesign a public park in a neighborhood known for its poverty and crime. The park had been abandoned, a symbol of neglect. But Elijah, working alongside local artists and community members, transformed it into a vibrant, colorful space, filled with murals, sculptures, and interactive art installations. The project became a beacon of hope for the community, a reminder that art could transform not only spaces, but lives. Elijah's influence was also felt in the boardrooms and the halls of power. Major institutions, once resistant to change, now looked to Caldwell's gallery for guidance on how to better diversify their collections and engage with communities that had been historically excluded. Corporations and museums began to realize the value of what Elijah had long understood, that art was not just about aesthetics or wealth, but about creating connections, telling stories, and shaping culture. Even as Elijah's personal fame and influence grew, his thoughts often returned to the day he had stood before the gallery owner who had dismissed his work so many years ago. That moment had been a turning point, a catalyst for everything that followed. He often wondered if the man, who had once looked down on his art, had ever realized the impact of his words, or the power of his own underestimation. The answer came one evening when Elijah received an unexpected letter. The envelope was embossed with the logo of Caldwell's gallery, but the handwriting inside was unmistakable. It was from the former gallery owner, the one who had mocked Elijah's art so many years ago. "I've been watching your journey, Elijah," the letter began. "And I must admit, I was wrong. I misjudged you, and I misjudged your art. You've done what I never thought possible. You've changed the game, and I want to offer my sincerest congratulations. I don't expect forgiveness or even a reply, but I wanted to say, in my own way, that I was wrong." Elijah read the letter twice, letting the weight of it sink in. It wasn't an apology, but it didn't need to be. The gallery owner's words were a testament to the changes Elijah had created, proof that his work, his journey, had left a lasting impact. That evening, Elijah took a walk through the gallery, looking at the walls that had witnessed his rise, the pieces of art that had become part of his legacy. His gallery had become something far greater than just a place to sell art. It was a sanctuary for creativity, a place where the misunderstood, the overlooked, and the marginalized could thrive. It was a place where art had the power to change lives, to tell stories that had never been told before, and to challenge the systems that sought to silence them. As Elijah stood before Roots of Fire, now framed and displayed as the centerpiece of the gallery, he realized that the legacy he had created was not just his own. It was a collective effort, a legacy built by the artists he had championed, the voices he had lifted, and the community he had fostered. It was a legacy that would continue for generations to come, long after his name was no longer on everyone's lips. And as the gallery's lights dimmed and the final patrons left for the night, Elijah Collins stood alone in the quiet space, knowing that his work was far from over. His journey had been long, and it had been hard, but it had been worth every struggle. His legacy would live on, not just through the art that filled the gallery, but through the countless artists who would follow in his footsteps, artists who would change the world, just as he had.